Progress.
Let's bow in. Welcome everyone to the Path of Awakening course. Tonight we'll be covering the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma, Volume 3, The Tantric Path of Indestructible Wakefulness, Part 5, Complete Commitment, and Chapter 19, Samaya, Making a Commitment. So Michael is going to lead off. Michael, take it away.
Yes, so welcome everyone. As it turns out today, April 4th, is the 36th anniversary of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche's Parinirvana, this passage. So I think it's a particularly auspicious day, favorable day to practice. It's said that the best offering we can make to a teacher is our practice, so we can appreciate that. I also wanted to share just a thought I had. As I think most of you know, I did a solitary retreat last month, and I had a moment on retreat where it became very clear to me that from the point of view of the practice, that the essential thing was waking up, and that particularly the first few days of retreat, intensive meditation practice, there's a lot of settling down, letting go that has to happen because you're practicing many hours, and solitary retreat, there's nobody else to relate to. So whatever happens is your mind. And it became very clear to me that from the point of view of the practice, that what mattered was waking up, and that whatever conventional things I might be attached to, whatever aims, goals, ambitions I might have, that to the extent that they got in the way of that they needed to be, that I needed to let go. Almost in a, I don't want to say the word ruthless because that's a little too cutting, but it really reminded me, in essence, of what it could sometimes be like to be with Trungpa Rinpoche, because in the same way, what was most important was waking up, being present. And a lot of the things that we might otherwise feel are important to us or give us some sense of security. It's not that these necessarily needed to be cut through on the spot, but at the same time, to the extent that we were attached to them in a way that prevented us from waking up, his compassion was such that the message was just to wake up and to try to see through things, try to see through our way of relating to things that causes us to stay asleep. So I just wanted to bring that up because the very first section of this chapter, Samaya Making a Commitment, was titled The Haunting Quality of Commitment. And I like the way that he kind of sums up in just a few words the essence of Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. And he starts out by saying the moment we open our eyes, and that alone is significant because so much of the time we don't open our eyes. We're caught up in our thoughts, we're caught up in our ambitions, we're thinking miles ahead, or we're completely caught up in something that happened some time ago. And in a sense, our eyes aren't open. But he says when we do open our eyes, then we realize, I'm going to, as he says, that we want to become involved in this discipline of individual salvation. I'm going to work with myself, I'm going to practice shamatha discipline. That we come to have some sense of the importance of taming the mind and some sense of the power that there is in just simply being present and being awake. And he says at this point, we're already haunted. And then with the Mahayana, he says, now I'm going to transfer my care for myself to others, and I couldn't care less for me. With that, we're even still further haunted, almost ridiculously haunted. So here again, with the Mahayana, what we're letting go of is our fixation on always putting ourselves first. The constant question, what about me? And beginning to relate more to a larger world, a more open world with more compassion. And then finally, he says, when we begin to practice the Vajrayana, which is and say, as it says in the book, I am going to let loose, I'm going to let go of all my preconceptions of any kind and enter this particular journey which nobody knows. And with this, we're even more haunted. So it's interesting, the word haunted. I just looked at some different definitions, and I think the definition that best captures this is something that's not easily forgotten, like a haunting melody or haunting images, something that comes back to us over and over again. And that is what the journey of waking up, of awareness, meditation practice is. We come back over and over again. We're haunted by a sense that things could be different, that things actually are different, and that we just don't recognize. It goes back to the moment we open our eyes. So with that, he says that this haunting quality seems to be all right. And he points out that the basic commitment is all together with this chapter, which is titled Samaya, Making a Commitment. So we're talking about what we're committing ourselves to. That basically the basic commitment is to ourselves. Of course, he says in the book, your basic commitment is to yourself. And then beyond that, there's a commitment to others, which is obviously the extension into Mahayana and Vajrayana, and to the teacher will arise naturally. And he gives us an example of this, that if we are really serious about our education, wanting to have a good education, that our commitment will extend beyond that, that will extend the education we receive toward others. And as I say, I think that we can see this in this group when people ask questions, when people share their feelings and their experiences, and when people comment, that this is something that helps us all. So that, again, this basic commitment expands, it grows. We're haunted, in a sense. He says the development of commitment is a natural process. It's a path. So that basically, he says, basically, our commitment is intact as long as we are committed to ourselves, recommitted to ourselves in practicing our daily routine. So again, he's talking here about, among other things, the importance of a regular practice, regular study, and also the importance of not externalizing our motivation, feeling like somebody else is doing something to us or that we're doing this for someone else. That essentially it comes out of our own experience, and that it's our commitment to ourselves. And that when we realize this, and as long as we keep this in mind and don't externalize some sense of commitment, then commitment grows naturally, that it becomes path, further and further opening, further and further exploring. Or as he always said, look further, look further. That we're not trying to force anything or judging ourselves, but just allowing ourselves to become who we are. The next section, he talks about secrecy in regard to Vajrayana, where he says, first of all, that it's quite rare to hear the Vajrayana and difficult to understand the Vajrayana because of its secretness. But the secretness isn't so much that people keep things from us, as more that it's self-secret, that the Vajrayana becomes accessible to us as we become open to it, as we come more and more to recognize and realize things about ourselves, the nature of mind, our experience in the world, that as we become more open, then the Vajrayana becomes more open to us. And so long as we relate to the teachings with some kind of fixed point of view, or more importantly, some ego-driven point of view, because this does bring this up in the chapter, then it is secret. It is secret from us. It's not, the Vajrayana teachings in particular are not something that can be grasped by conceptual mind. This is also true of Mahayana teachings to some extent as well, and even true on some level in the Hinayana, but it's particularly the Vajrayana teachings that are self-secret in this way. He says we have to understand the meaning behind the whole thing before we can conceive an understanding of Vajrayana secretness. And again, this is because ultimately it's beyond the strategy of ego, beyond trying to any kind of goal or any kind of conceptual orientation, that conceptual mind can be helpful in pointing us in the right direction, but we still have to go in that direction, which is, going beyond that, going beyond concept to our actual experience. And this can be just as simple, really, as what we find when we do meditation practice and realize that we are distracted, we're caught up, and then actually able to settle into just the present moment, present awareness, and realize that there's a quality of peace, a quality of clarity, a quality of openness to our minds that most of the time we're not in touch with. And so again, it's not a secret that someone else is keeping from us, but it's self-secret that until we're able to relax, open up, settle, it is secret from us in a sense, but it's self-secret in that it's how open we are that determines our ability to connect with these teachings. And for this reason, he says secretness and sacredness are one thing. And again, it really comes down to our ability to let go and open up. He goes into some different words for secret, and they're Latin and Greek roots, cryptos and secretus in Latin. But what he brings up in the end is that the hidden spiritual teachings were called mystery. And the word mystery means something hidden. These secret spiritual teachings were not made public. And what I thought about this here is that I was remembering that one of the projects that he had in Boulder was a series of conferences on Christian and Buddhist meditation, because he felt that there actually was a very genuine contemplative tradition in Christianity, in monastic Christianity. And he really wanted to, felt it was important to keep that alive and to bring it out. And so there were conferences in Boulder on Christian and Buddhist meditation. With people from Catholic monasteries and later Jewish as well, Jewish contemplative tradition. And it was very interesting. I attended one of those. It was really, really interesting to hear the different ways in which people talked about contemplative practice in the different traditions, and just the incredible commonalities that were pretty evident in terms of just basically developing a genuine practice that actually helped people to open up. So, and he really wanted to restore, and wanted to preserve, and wanted to honor this, this original practice and realization, these different traditions. In any case, he also brings up the Sanskrit words guya and gupta, meaning secret, hidden, cryptic. But he says mysterious seems to imply something very immediate, connected with speech, whereas hidden is more connected with body and mind. But again, in the Vajrayana, he says secrecy does not mean that something is hidden because it's criminal, but it means something that is inconceivable to others. They wouldn't understand it, and therefore it's hidden until they see it. So again, it's what we're able to recognize, what we're able to understand, what we're able to open ourselves to. And this also goes back to what we talked about in the last chapter, the importance of the Vajra master, the teacher, in helping us, introducing us to the face, so that, as it was termed in the last chapter, so that again, what's secret isn't hidden because of some deliberate effort to keep it from us. It's more what we're willing to let ourselves go and be open to experiencing and recognizing. And along with this, the next section is demolishing the hidden corners of samsara, because this is what gets in our way. This is what causes us to not recognize, to be caught up and not see, not experience. So he says, why do we tread on the Vajrayana path? And it says, again, this is where we have to really think about or recognize the importance of letting go of any kind of ego-oriented approach to the teachings. It's not because we're going to get a good deal. It's not because we might have a hope to receive some secret magic that we can use in some way to invite or subjugate or be aggressive toward people. All of that, falls into spiritual materialism, that we're not really opening up. We're just trying to preserve ego and strengthen ego, and that these are the hidden corners of samsara that we need to demolish. He says we're talking about the Vajrayana path in order to liberate all sentient beings from their samsaric trips and their samsaric hidden corners. We're treading on this path in order to bring people out of their tendency to rest in their neuroses. And this again, that the Vajrayana in particular is an uncompromising wake-up call to awareness, that it's not bound to conventional concerns and fixations. It's not bound to trying to establish some kind of security or some kind of power in a way that preserves ego, that preserves the self, but that it really comes down to compassion for others, and a very powerful sense of compassion. So he says we have to reach a mutual understanding between the student and Vajramaster, that we actually have to demolish the hidden corners of samsara. So this is an important part of what we're undertaking with the Samaya vow, that we are saying that this is what we will do, that we're willing to let go, we're willing to surrender, we're willing to open up, we're ready to we're always ready to let go of the parts of samsara we don't like, but we don't realize how the parts we like to keep us tied up and keep us perpetuating suffering. And the Vajrayana is to go beyond all of that. He says, as Buddhists, we're the only ones who would like to actually expose samsara's tricks. And that's why Vajrayana is a powerful mechanism. It doesn't depend on people's tricks and deceptions. It doesn't depend on any kind of hypocrisy or any attempt to hold on to something for oneself. So that there's a purity and a naturalness and an uncontrived sense to what we're meant to recognize, what we're meant to identify with and come to rest in. And he says this is why it's necessary to have a Vajramaster who never keeps anything secret from you, and that this creates a mutual bond in terms of practicing the Vajrayana. So then he says, why aren't Hinayana and Mahayana enough? And what we know from what we've read so far is they're certainly necessary and helpful. We've read several talks where he's talked about the importance of the Hinayana foundation and Mahayana understanding of compassion and emptiness. But we have to go beyond that. It's not, he says, it's not enough. Until we get into the Vajrayana, we have not understood basic phenomena properly. There's still some kind of an attachment, still some kind of we haven't completely demolished all the corners of samsara. And he says, and we're talking about phenomena at this point, we're talking about an integrating enlightened mind as essence with enlightenment in reality. So again, in the Mahayana, as we've read, the sense is that Tathagata is as if we had a Buddha in essence in us, whereas with the Vajrayana, we actually have within us, if we could recognize it, if we could develop confidence, let go into it, that there's already a fully awakened Buddha nature, and a fully awakened Buddha in us. That is our fundamental true nature, whether we recognize it or not. So as he says, as far as the Vajrayana is concerned, enlightenment is actual existence, actual reality. It is our actual situation. So then he says, well, why do we study? And he says we have to study because we have not actually faced that particular truth. In other words, that it is our situation, that it is our reality. So to understand that this is the case, we have to use language that allows us to understand what is happening. So we need to study, we need to practice, because we haven't actually faced this particular truth fully, that we are Buddha, that we have Buddha, and that we can be Buddha. Along with this is the next section talks about indestructibility and the symbolism of the Vajra. And he describes the, I guess, Hindu myth of what Vajra comes from. That traditionally, it's an indestructible weapon that always fulfills its purpose. And he says that the Vajra in Vajrayana represents the indivisibility of power and wisdom. That when we're fully present, when body, speech, and mind are fully synchronized, when we're fully awake, that there's tremendous power and wisdom. And he says that the Vajra evokes the sense of a very powerful force that can't be cracked or conned. That it's in Tibetan, it's dorje, which is diamond-like. And he says that the Vajrayana is diamond-like, that this vehicle is indestructible. It can't be destroyed by saboteurs who'd like to maintain their own personal secrecy, some corner of samsara that we're not ready to demolish. And he describes the Vajra Sangha as being indestructible because it develops a bond with the Vajra Master, that we're bonding together ourselves, the Vajra Master, along with our practice and discipline, so that this becomes who we are. It's all bound together. And that finally the Vajra Master and the Vajrayana, the teacher is called the Vajra Master because they have that indestructible quality, that we can't intimidate, buy, or corrupt such a person with sense pleasures or money. The Vajra Master doesn't like tricks, doesn't like any kind of deception or indulgence, any kind of avoidance of reality, any kind of avoidance of our true nature of any kind. And with this, he says that the role of the teacher in Vajrayana is more like a warrior than just a teacher, which again connects with the Shambhala teachings, that there really is a sense of fearlessness, willingness to go further with this. And that the teacher is going to be tough with us, like training, he says it's like training the Vajra Master as henchmen and henchwomen. And for the student, the point is to develop fearless devotion. He says if your devotion becomes fearful, there's still something that needs to be cut through. So with all this as background, we begin actually talking about the Samaya vow, which is the next section in this chapter. And begins by saying with the Samaya vow that once we understand the Vajra Master principle, we can begin to understand the Samaya principle. So we were introduced to the Vajra Master principle back in chapter 9, which is a chapter called Total Surrender of Samsaric Logic, which is quite similar to the idea of demolishing the hidden corners of samsara. And in that chapter, he said it's impossible for a beginning student to relate with the Vajrayana teachings without the Vajra Master opening the door of Vajrayana to the student. The Vajra Master opens the experience of Vajrayana to you. That through our discipline and our connection with the Vajra Master, we transcend the mundane states of body, speech, and mind. He talks about conventional, ego-oriented states of body, speech, and mind. Go back and read the chapter. But we transcend these mundane states of body, speech, and mind so that everything is regarded as sacred. Body, speech, and mind are regarded as sacred, a sacred and holy environment. And he says this is dependent on each of us individually, but evoking that quality of sacredness depends on someone who can actually initiate that possibility. The initial provocation is provided by the deities of Vajrayana. These various principles or deities are basically natural reflections of our own Vajra nature, but they manifest as a power source in the beginning. So the idea again is that the Vajra Master, the teacher, points out to us possibilities that we may not be aware of, may seem very distant to us, but we have some inkling could be true. We have some experience perhaps in meditation practice that we can wake up, that we can let go, that we can simply be. And this is what gets provoked. It's the teacher who pushes us into that situation, he says. So Samaya basically, he translates as sacred word or sacred commitment, something by which we're bound together, Damsik in Tibetan. And he says the Samaya principle is a kind of verbal agreement or oath. The foundation of Samaya is the practice of shamatha vipassana, which quells our discursive thoughts. The practice of shamatha vipassana, which quells our discursive thoughts. Without that foundation, he says, we wouldn't have a chance of paying attention to anything. We'd be blown here and there by our discursive thoughts. But with the Samaya vow, the teacher and students are bound together in one particular project. That nobody could make a commitment of this kind without relating to the Vajra Master, who is a holder of the lineage and who is the individual's actual Vajra teacher. So this is the beginning of our discussion of Samaya vow. There's actually several chapters here. But essentially, it's a commitment to waking up. It includes everything that would be involved in the refuge and bodhisattva vows, but it's fully a commitment to realizing fully the nature of our minds. And at this point, I'll turn it over to John, who will discuss the rest of the chapter.
Thank you, Michael. All right. I would like to just, first of all, I'd like to invite any comments or questions. This is very profound material. We were going to do this at the end too, so if you want to hold off. But if there's anything now. Okay. The next section is called Commitment in the Three Yanas. Before we go into this, I'm just going to make a couple of comments too about what Michael covered. That this path at the Mahayana level is about waking up to compassion, true compassion for others, so that you put others before yourself, and to wisdom, which is seeing things as they are instead of through the veils of our likes and dislikes. We're constantly, as we walk down the streets of our lives, judging everything. Do I like it? Do I not like it? And seeing it in terms of for me and against me. This is really about waking up to seeing things beyond that, beyond those self-concerns and those judgments. In other words, to seeing things in the context of shunyata, to waking up to the idea of non-duality, no I or other. And more than that, seeing this world stripped of the I other concerns as being very luminous, vivid, because the I other concerns gray the world out. Whether we like something, don't like it, think it's good, bad, what's it going to do for me, to me, all these things gray the world out. And the process of meditation is to step beyond all those mental concerns and to see the world as it truly is in all of its vivid beauty, although even that may be too judgmental a word. But certainly in terms of its luminosity, the word that they use in the teachings is usually translated as luminosity, prabhasvara in Sanskrit, Ursel in Tibetan. And so we're being enjoined to enter a world that's very different from the samsaric world. The samsaric world is very repetitive in its samsaric logic and very dulled out, whereas the world of the Vajrayana that it's enjoining us to enter is magical, vivid, alive, meaningful. This is a transformed world. And in order to enter it, we have to realize that we are Buddha. We are awake. It's not that we're going to be there someday, because then that constantly puts it off, but that we are it now. We begin to tune in to this world of the three kayas that we discussed before, in which everything is arising and passing away in the present moment without any substance. And yet, that's the Dharmakaya. And yet vividly, incredibly vividly and communicatively, that's the Sambhogakaya. And with immense heart, love for this world, and sorrow for its transience, which is the Nirmanakaya, compassion. Those three kayas, and we begin to wake up to this. In order to do that, It's very necessary to have a Vajra master in some form or another, a human being to whom we can relate, who can open this door for us and open our eyes to this world. Trungpa Rinpoche was such a one, and he was very unusual in his day. There aren't very many like him. He had this magical ability to open the student's mind to this world. And really, when he's writing this book about the Vajrayana, and he's talking about the Vajra Master, for us who really only knew him, we hadn't really gotten into any relationship with any other Vajra Masters. He was describing himself. So this material is getting increasingly difficult because we don't have Trungpa Rinpoche here anymore. Although his being and his teachings and his words and his magic echo in a faint way through his students, through me, Kurt, Kurt, and Michael and any others. But there are very few people like him around. We're going, because of this difficulty and this necessity of having a Vajra master, we're going to take a break from the profound treasury for a little while, starting next week. And we're going to move into a book which I think might help, especially with the Mahayana stage of the path and to some degree with the Vajrayana stage too. We're going to go into, what's it called? I constantly forget the title. Here it is. Mind at Ease by Trolig Kyabgon Rinpoche. And we're going to start with that next week. You'll be getting an email shortly. And you can buy the book at Amazon or through Shambhala Publications, which would be a bit slower. Or you can also even get a free PDF of it at pdffiles.com. All of this is in the email that you'll be getting. And we're going to spend some weeks going through this and maybe incorporating some of it into our practice, especially the more Mahayana elements. So the next section in this chapter, though, is called Commitment in the Three Yanas. In the first yana, the Hinayana, the foundational yana, we make a commitment by taking the refuge vow and the bodhisattva vow. The refuge vow. And it binds us to the Dharma for a lifetime, assuming that we're sincere in our inspiration and in taking this vow. And we take refuge in the Buddha as the example, of course, in the Dharma as the path, and in the Sangha as companionship on that path. And he says that the idea is to prevent yourself from being a nuisance to yourself and others. You begin to basically repress your neurotic tendencies, to get rid of them, to prevent you from indulging in pleasure and frivolousness that might produce further nuisance, trying to keep your life simpler through the practice of shamatha and vipassana. You achieve a kind of simplicity. We're working to relieve ourselves, to renounce the more gross and obvious forms of suffering and neuroticism. The Mahayana, we're binding ourselves to the Mahayana teachings, which have to do, and also to the teacher now. See, the teacher in the Hinayana stage of the path is a preceptor. So they're showing you by example how you can live a cleaner, more upright, and virtuous life. At the Mahayana level, your commitment is to the teacher as a spiritual friend, Kalyana Mitra in Sanskrit, Mitra means friend. Kalyana has to do with treading the path. And you maintain this commitment until you attain enlightenment. That's the length of this commitment. And as part of this, increasingly, you're abandoning your own desire for personal enlightenment and committing yourself to helping other sentient beings. That means, in our case, as human beings and animals, unless there are some among us who also have access to the other realms, God realms or hell realms or whatever it may be. So we're committing ourselves to helping these sentient beings and abandoning our own personal enlightenment. That may sound like self-punishment, but it's not. It's simply that in the Mahayana, we become increasingly inspired by shunyata, by beginning to see this world of reality stripped of I, other neuroses, and we're increasingly inspired by love, compassion for the world. And we wish genuinely to be of service, that it's pleasurable, it's full of love and joy. And so the idea of giving up our own personal search for enlightenment is not an act of self-punishment or renunciation, so much as it's an expression of our inspiration, our love and desire to be of service. And he says there's a quality of positive heroism, not that we're trying to be heroic, but that it comes naturally at the Mahayana stage of the path. The more you progress along this path, and the more selflessness sets in. The Vajrayana commitment is entirely different. This is the bondage of the vow, the Samaya vow, that lasts until ultimate sanity is completely achieved, he says. And this ultimate sanity involves the selflessness of the Mahayana, yes. But more than that, it involves seeing this world as it truly is, which is alive and magical, beyond reason, in this moment. We tend to make the world so ordinary according to our own conceptual prejudices. And this is about waking up from that. I mean, we're living in the middle of this inexplicable universe. Where did this all come from? I'm sitting here in the middle of this amazing snowstorm that's been going on since 5:30 this morning. That's over 12 hours. And everything is just magically transformed. Well, the whole world is doing that all the time. And we're waking up to that magic in the Vajrayana. He says, now discipline becomes the complete practice, and your entire experience becomes discipline. Discipline means being awake here and now. With this Samaya, you are signing over your life to the Vajra Master. You're inspired to do that because the Vajra Master and your connection with this person, your friendship, your love, your openness of communication opens up this magical world, which is both beautiful, seductive, and choiceless. And to the tantric deities, your body, possessions, relatives, whole life, the tantric deities you see are the magic of this world as it presents itself to us. When you eventually take part in Abhisheka is an initiation. Abhisheka is a ceremony by which you are given permission to do practices that open up this magical world. You drink the Samaya oath water. This is the symbol of taking Samaya. You drink this oath water. The formal Samaya vows, surrendering your sanity completely to the teacher and the lineage with ultimate devotion and faith, he says. You're surrendering your sanity. Really, what you're surrendering is what you've been holding on to all this time, this desire for security and safety, which doesn't mean that you're now in enormous danger. It means that you've given up the fear. Sorry, hold on a second.
You can decline it right here, John.
Phone call. He says, at this point, you try to take your vow, if you try to take your vow back due to resentment, confusion, ignorance, fear, what you get back is Vajra neurosis. It's a lot of unhappiness. Because you have violated Samaya, you go utterly crazy. I don't know. I don't think you have to go utterly crazy, but you can go pretty crazy. And if you go completely against your Samaya, you'll be destroyed. And this is real Vajrayana stuff. Now he talks about using poison as medicine. And this is a very difficult section. Poison here refers to, among other things, the kleshas, passion, hatred and aggression, jealousy, envy, feelings of poverty, animal stupidity. But the three main kleshas are passion, aggression, and ignoring. You know, when two things are in relationship, I and other, if you see the other as being favorable to you, then you want to pull it to you. That's passion. Make love to it, consume it. If you see the other as being aggressive, inimical to your existence, harmful, threatening, you want to push it away, and that's aggression. And if you see the other as being neutral, then you tend to ignore it. And that's called, they usually translate that as ignorance, but I always feel that's a bad translation because there's the fundamental ignorance and they're not the same at all. This one is just really a matter of ignoring. So our normal approach to these kleshas is that we want to get rid of them. How? Either by acting them out. You might punch somebody in the nose to get rid of your anger, or by suppressing them. You know, you suppress your anger, let's say. Just sit on it, squash it, which doesn't really work. In fact, neither one of them works. They both keep them alive. And what the Vajra Master teaches us to do is to acknowledge these with him or her, to bring them conscious, present, as part of our relationship, so that we're no longer trying to get rid of them at all, which is an act of dishonesty. We're trying to pretend that we don't have them. We're going to get rid of them because they're nasty, they're evil, they're ugly, they're smelly. And instead, the Vajra Master says, no, I want to know more about this. I want to see it. I want you to be it. And the Vajra Master will be it with you. And this opens up the world because you no longer are me, this person here, holding on to an idea of yourself that excludes the ugliness of the kleshas. that wants to get rid of them. Instead, you are as you are. And this can become an act of love, an act of enormous communication that the Vajra Master teaches us. And so this poison, as he says in this section, so-called poison, that we want to get rid of either by acting it out or by suppressing it, becomes medicine. It's based on the inspiration of your guru and your yidam, your tutelary deity, who also represents awakening, acknowledgement of these kleshas. And then they begin to become wisdom. Wisdom not in the sense of knowing something you didn't know, but of being able to be what you truly are without trying to suppress or get rid of it. This inspiration, he says, the inspiration for this comes from dedicating yourself to a guru, a Vajra master, of a particular lineage, and regarding the guru's inspiration as a resource for creating real miracles. Because when you begin to acknowledge this with another person, the sense of self begins to fall away. And when the sense of self begins to fall away, the sense of other begins to fall away. And the world begins to open up as a magical place. Right now, here, this constant arising of newness. And so he talks about not trusting normal logic. Normal logic is all about I and other, calming, peaceful, getting rid of the kleshas, the poisons. He says in the Vajrayana you have a chance to create miracles because you do not have particular trust in normal logic. In fact, in the Vajrayana world, the real world of the Vajrayana, that the Vajra Master wants you to step into with him or her, there is no logic at all. It's just complete, utter, vivid immediacy. Another way into this is art. It's a gentler way in, perhaps, but it's also opening up this world of magic. He says, truth and lies both bounce back on your attempts to secure your well-being. The attempt to secure your well-being is it's neuroticism. It's all about me, and other, and how it relates to me, and I'm going to use that other to secure my imagined well-being. Imagine how we've been taught in particular styles by our parents or the environment as we've grown up. What is my well-being? What is it dependent on? And we go and we try to secure it over and over and over again. It's so repetitive, so neurotically repetitive, and so lost in dream, thought, bad dreams. He says, truth and lies in the Vajrayana both bounce back on your attempts to secure your well-being, because that's what it's founded on. There's no logic to it, truth or lie. The Vajrayanist does not have to stick to any logic. You could say yes or no, he says. It's not quite random, however. There is still some logic involved. And the seed of this logic is that if there is any kind of lie, it will bounce back on you. Wow. And we experience this a lot. He says the Vajrayana is the most highly sensitive lie detector that ever existed in any yana, in any vehicle. The Mahayana works vaguely with trusting in karmic consequences. You know, if you do something bad, you get something bad back. And the Hinayana works very basically with the level of suffering and personal neurosis. But the Vajrayana is a police officer with a baton and a gun and mace and all the rest of it. The consequences come back to you very sharply. It is like feeling pins and needles in your legs when you sit for a long time, and I think a lot worse than that too. Can be. So the final section is about bondage and freedom. And Samaya, which is the commitment to all this, in the oath that you take. You see, when you take an abhisheka, that's an initiation into a particular practice, you will take Samaya vows. The most important Samaya vow is the vow of obedience to the teacher. The second most important Samaya vow is at least in my experience, I might be a little off with this, I don't think so, is the vow of secrecy. That you're not going to reveal what is happening in this abhisheka to other people. In fact, you can only, with a lot of the abhishekas, you're only allowed to discuss them with people who were there at that particular occurrence of the abhisheka. If someone got it 3 years before you, you still can't talk to them about it. In some of these, it has to be, that person had to have been there at your abhisheka. Now, that's some of them are the other abhishekas. You can talk about it to someone else who's had that abhisheka. He says, so Samaya has nothing to do with maintaining personal territory. Oh, and the other reason, you see, goes back to what Michael was talking about, that these teachings are increasingly self-secret. This magic of the Vajrayana is only known to us if we've experienced it. And there are levels and levels and levels, and experiences and experiences and experiences. And we, to the extent that we have come down these levels, we understand or have these experiences. And to the extent that we haven't, we don't understand. And so these things are self-secret. And it's the Vajra master who opens this door to all these secrets. So Samaya is territory-lessness that cuts through falsity and lies and the desire for personal gain and liberation. The desire for personal gain and liberation is the biggest stumbling block. It's ego. It's the block. It's the veil. It's selfish. Self-ish. It's like, that's being like a self, right? And it blocks everything. He says the guru is the executioner of ego and also your inspiration, because the guru shows you the doorway into this world and wants you to enter it, to be with the guru, to be with him in ultimate love and friendship. The guru is the initiator or the preceptor of the abhisheka, the one who could bring you into the realm of body, speech, and mind of your inherent Buddha nature. That's what the guru is doing, is bring you into the Buddha name, could bring your Buddha nature to the surface, because it's hidden. He says, basic Samaya principle comes up when you're about to enter into the Vajrayana discipline altogether, when you're about to begin your practice. And people who have started Nundro are bound by Samaya, doing prostrations, Vajrasattva mantra and the rest. And this basic bond consists of your trust in the truth of the teachings and in the teacher's trust in your genuineness. That's where the bond lies. And if you don't trust the teachings, there is no Samaya bond, and there is no magic. Combining these two aspects of trust, that of the student and that of the teacher, creates the Vajra world. And Trungpa Rinpoche's students like me and Michael, we can, to varying degrees, communicate this, but we certainly can't communicate it the way a real Vajra master like him, like he was, can do. He says that commitment seems to be very important. He says there is a sense of commitment, and there is the willingness to accept the Vajra world and jump into it. That commitment seems to be very important. Even before a student decides to practice Mundro or any other preliminary practices. It's beyond reasonability. It's not reasonable. The Samaya principle is bondage. It is an oath that exists between the teacher and the student, and more than the teacher, between the lineage and the student. Basically, the Vajra master and the student of Vajrayana are joined together in a love affair, instigated by the various tantric deities. And here he's talking about himself. In Vajrayana, you study and work with different deity principles, and you actually become a part of their world, but it is not based on the worship of any god. Tantric deities, we're just using an English word, deity. The word is yidam, which has to do with holy mind. Like the Dam in Damsik, which is Damsik is the word for Samaya. Dam means holy and Sik means word or expression. Damsik, holy word, Samaya. And here we're talking about yidams, holy mental aspects. That's what is being translated with the Western word deity, which is an inadequate translation. Yidam is we better off using that. He says these tantric deities, these yidams, are part of your innate nature, which is shining through and being experienced. In the Vajrayana, you are celebrating that experience properly and fully, to the extent that you can see it. So the Samaya bond means that no one is deceiving anyone. It is reality in the fullest sense. And then if either the Vajra master or the Vajra student violates that, their mutual vow, they will suffer in the lower realms of the animal realm, the realm of the hungry ghosts, and the hell realms. So that particular bond or Samaya is very important and powerful. And then he says this, and this is, he says, it's interesting about the Samaya bond that the more freedom you experience, because you're getting free of your neurotic mind, your repetitive, stupid, preconceiving, prejudiced, neurotic mind that we all have. I like this, I don't like that. This is good, that's bad, all the rest. What's happening to me? Am I doing well? So he says, the more freedom you experience, that much more bondage takes place in you. The bondage is to reality. The more you develop openness and a letting go of shedding your ego, that much more commitment there is to this world of sanity. Therefore, student and teacher are bound together eternally. Wow. Samaya binds you not only from the outside like a belt you put on, but at the same time it binds you from within. If you let go of that bondage, you will find that you are on the top of a garbage chute and that you will go right down the drain. This is a warning, and there are many other warnings that come. But if you constantly maintain the bondage and stay bound together, you will go further and further on your journey together. You can actually go along and uplift yourself with delight, confidence, and sanity in the Vajra world. And this Vajra world is the world of magic, non-reason, and it's here right now, all around us. And finally, you transcend the Vajra world and go beyond even the Dharmakaya level and attain absolute sanity. At that point, the bondage is dissolved and you become one with co-emergent wisdom. Co-emergent wisdom is the ultimate reality. It's the reality from which enlightenment and confusion arise. It's the reality from which all phenomena arise. It's co-emergent. It merges everything together. So this is a pretty blown out chapter. As I read this, I can only think of him, of course, but some trepidation. So we can have a discussion. Mark Eskenazi.
Hi, sorry. No, this is a great chapter. Just wonderful. I mean, this is just a reminder that there's so. I was thinking of the Heart Sutra, emptiness is form and form is emptiness, and how that on some level, at some time you feel that's, oh, how that's so ridiculous. And then if you could just imagine for a minute, if every 100 years was just a second, how much form would I see? How much would be changing? Or if I was a fruit fly and I only lived 24 hours. I mean, everything is so subjective to our situation. I know this is kind of out there, but I thought it was interesting, his medicine and poison. And again, how do we relate to this? And you take 2 Tylenol and it cures your headache. I know this is not the point you were making, but and then you take 20 Tylenol and you need a liver transplant. Or you take a little bit of Coumadin and it thins your blood so you don't have a stroke. You take a lot of Coumadin and you die. It's used as rat poison. Or you take a little nitroglycerin and it opens up your coronary arteries. And you take a lot and you can blow up a building. And I know that's not really related to, but I'm just saying things, that's actually a samsaric view of how they are. But the point is, things can be very different than, the simplicity of what is this and what is that. It's not so clear, and it's exciting. I mean, I'm thinking of my walk today and how incredible it is to feel the spring again and to see the buds. And again, that's just the regular world, but it's just, it's pretty incredible. Anyway, that's basically it. I don't even know if it's relates to this so much, but that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Kurt.
I'm curious about the idea of the secret of this teaching, and the way I took that is that like the teaching is secret from my conceptual way of understanding. And it's kind of took it that, you know, the teaching is being revealed to me, but as long as I'm trying to conceptually understand this and try to understand this in my old repetitive way of thinking, it is not accessible. And Michael mentioned also in that same sentence was the sacred. And I kind of tied that into that same place, that same idea as well, is that the sacred we can't really conceptualize in our normal way of thinking. I mean, the sacred I see is an alternative worldview and looking at things in a magical way. And I don't know, I just wonder if there's any thoughts around that idea of secrecy and sacred. I guess the other thought I had, and this might be way off base, is that when we may have a glimpse of the understanding, the teachings and the secret, which was said was revealed by the Vajra master. And if we do have that Buddha nature within us, it seems to me logically that we would also have that Vajra master within us. So, you know, when we have an opening, an understanding to that secret, is that being revealed by an inner Vajra master? I don't know if that's a question or just kind of revealing how I thought of that statement. Thank you.
Michael, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I'll start with the end. I think you're right that part of it is our inner wakefulness, Vajramat, whatever you want to call it, bodhicitta, tathagata garbha, that is what recognizes it. Ultimately with, or rigpa, whatever you want to call it, that is ultimately what recognizes and what recognizes itself as well. And then the other thing with self-secret, if you've ever had the experience of reading a Dharma text and then reading it again sometimes later, and it has like a very different meaning to you. I think a lot of people have had that experience. I know I have many times. In that sense also, that's an essence of, it wasn't being hidden from us, but it was secret. And when we read it again, maybe with more practice, I personally would say I've found, even reading the chapters in the Profound Treasury, that it can read really different to me if I practice first and then read, as opposed to just reading in the middle of the day. And it's not secret in the sense of, somebody hid it deliberately. It's what we're open to. But ultimately, I think you're absolutely right. It's our inner Vajra master, our inner guru, our inner wakefulness, Rigpa, all the, Tathagata Garbha, bodhicitta. That's ultimately, yes, what realizes, recognizes. And in a sense, it's recognizing itself.
Thanks. And so would you say that is entering that sacred world when we are recognizing ourself or recognizing it? Is that to me seems that would be similar to any kind of sacred experience, whether that's through this tradition or any other. That at least my interpretation of sacredness is that advanced state of knowing.
Yeah, I think with a real sense of immediacy or nowness, or like it says in the chant, whatever arises is fresh.
Mm-hmm.
There we are.
And more. I think it can go very, very deep. And it just depends on each one of us. And also the time, the circumstance, the communication. There's a magic to it. And that transcends any logic that we may have. And has to do with this extraordinary beauty and holiness of this world and everything in it that we tend not to see because we're so caught up in our concerns about paying rent, about our relationships, about our health, about our lives dying, whatever it might be. And this is really opening up and enjoining us to enter, I think, a very different version of the world. I mean, it's the same world, but seen differently.
It almost seems to be another secret quality that it can't be shared. It's such a deep individual experience that, trying to share it with another or express it, that only happens in a conceptual way, and it's lost.
I agree, except with the Vajramaster. So, and what that means is not only that this person is extraordinary, the Vajramaster, but that you have this relationship with them, and it's just like lovers meeting. You can't have a love affair if one person doesn't participate. And when both people participate, they share this love. And that's what's happening between the Vajramaster and the student. And that's why they call it various names for the relationship, but one of them is the meeting of the minds of teacher and student. And when they say meeting, there's no distinction between the two. They're both one in the realm of that understanding. This is emphasized a lot in these teachings.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's great.
Miriam?
Yeah, I was going to mention that something struck me in the class tonight that I hadn't fully sunk in before, which is, going to those samsaric corners, those places that I would use a psychological term, defended against, but we have blind spots with respect to ourselves, things that we want to get rid of. We might call them our kleshas, but the act of embracing it all, where the poison becomes the cure. And I found that really liberating. It's like, okay, we're allowed to be human. We have these inclinations. We don't have to fight against it. We just need to see it and be fully transparent. And yeah, this idea, those parts that we don't like about ourselves, to be able to say, well, it's there, and and so here we are, accepting, and then being able to go beyond. And my sense with the Vajramaster is that it can accelerate this process, that there's this type of confrontation almost where, well, maybe that's a strong word, but I would expect that the Vajramaster could be that mirror in a way to confront you and move forward a little bit faster, maybe, because by definition our blind spots are, we're kind of not wanting to see those aspects of ourselves. So I don't know what you think about that. We've talked about alternatives to a Vajramaster, finding it within us, or in teachings and so on. But still, I'm trying to relate to the original experience as it was communicated in the book.
Everything you said sounds right on.
Yeah.
How about Michael? Michael?
Feel the same way?
Yeah. Just sounds,
That's why the experience of the Vajra Master can be at once incredibly loving and terrifying at the same time.
yeah.
Because again, from
Yeah, I was going to say, even your therapist would not confront you so directly, I don't think, in such an honest way. Like, people around us usually cushion their comments or their communication. I just have a feeling that that relationship with the Vajra Master would be the most direct.
I agree. Absolutely. Well said. Yeah, we all have this in us, and we're just looking for the way to trigger it, is the way I feel about it. And when we're alone, we have our practice and study. But then there's the possibility of relationship. Which, with anybody, opens us up to something new. I mean, I know that I'm not alone in this, that when I entered a room, if I entered just to ask Trungpa Rinpoche what he wanted for lunch, or something like that, I felt amazingly self-conscious. That I always felt he could see straight through me once the relationship had been formed. And I think, frankly, he could. Michael, you
no,
same thing? But I mean, yeah, so he's talking about a paradigm, when describing himself. I recently heard another teacher describe him and say that a teacher like Trungpa Rinpoche comes along once every 500 years. Rather, who knows? But he was a very unusual person, and that's reflected in these writings. Shows us the possibilities. I think there are many other teachers around now who are impressive as well.
and there's so much more available in terms of translated texts and commentaries and so on. I remember taking a class in the late 70s and someone saying, well, could we read something that isn't by Trungpa Rinpoche? And the person teaching the class really had a hard, finally decided it would be good to read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. But I think now it's such a, 40, 50 years later, it's really different. There's a lot more available. But there really wasn't back then. It was very little.
Yeah, there was very little. Most of it was by Westerners too. Herbert Gunther, who was a German scholar and pretty good, but neurotic in his own way. He wrote, he was a follower of an English epistemologist named C.D. Broad, and he used Broad's vocabulary in talking about Tibetan Buddhism. And he had, even now, I think his understanding was quite good, but his vocabulary, oh my God, we heard words like gnosis all the time and noetic and these Latin terms.
There is a text that was self-secret. I remember trying to read Gunther way back, and I just gave up. It was like I had a friend who used to make a joke. Did you hear about the philosophy professor who was so dumb the other professors understood him? And I felt like this was not my experience. I could not get Gunther at all. But sometimes now I've read a few things and it makes sense to me. But it's again just having more background. But at the time, it was completely opaque, completely secret.
Yeah, a lot of them. There was a guy named Cherbatsky. He was a Russian, obviously. Cherbatsky was his name. And I was reading him. He was writing about Shunyata. He wrote a book called The Central Conception of Buddhism. And I was reading this thing, and I would go to Trungpa Rinpoche and say, is this what Sherbatsky means? You know, is this what he's saying? And we'd discuss it. Finally, I went to Trungpa Rinpoche and I said, is it possible that Sherbatsky missed the whole point? He looked at me and he said, this was after months, right? And he said, I was wondering when you'd get around to that.
Maybe one other thing to keep in mind again as we're reading this text is that Trungpa Rinpoche was presenting to students who were new to the whole thing, Vajrayana. So a lot of it was, preparing people for what was to come and helping them understand the view. And there would be some people who would come and been to previous seminaries, so they were, but for the majority of the audience, for every one of these talks, this was completely new material.
Well, almost. I mean, he had a pre-seminary class, and people would study under other people who he had authorized previous transcripts of previous seminaries. So they had more of a leg up. And they'd also done things that, like, there was a requirement that they had set a daton. That's a 1 month group meditation practice, which I don't know if anybody in this room has done. And maybe of some of these people had also gone on individual retreats, and they'd been to classes and courses. So I think that they were somewhat more prepared, a bit more anyhow, than we are in this group. Do you think, Michael? Is that fair to say?
Yeah. The advantage we have is we're able to read all of the Hinayana and Mahayana material,
Right.
which would not necessarily have been available to everyone. So,
Now, like the people who went to the 75 seminary, they had a class studying just the 74 transcripts. And then each year there was more to study from the previous years. These classes would be given by senior students before pre-seminary classes.
but Datsun really is a very powerful experience. So. You ever have a free month?
Yeah. And solitary retreat is even more powerful, but that has to be done carefully.
I think it's time.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Oh my gosh. Okay, sorry. I'll put up the chats. And who's going to?
I did.
You're going to lead us. That's right. All right. So I'll mute all, and we'll. Oh, let's see. Do we have any other announcements? Just group. Do you have the group discussion tomorrow? Mute everybody. So Michael, unmute yourself.
So we'll close our practice and study by reciting a prayer for peace and dedicating the merit generated through our practice and study for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigden's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, John, Michael, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, John.
Thank
Well,
you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks all.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, everyone.
Tomorrow.
See you soon.
All right.
Bye.